works with Michael's team. Today I'm going to talk about ISE 2.0, or sorry, the 2.0 to 3.x upgrade. So there's a lot of changes that come with the 3.0 and 3.1 release. So I like to go through some of those. There's some changes to ISE licensing, which is always everyone's favorite topic, a bunch of different features and things like that. So like Michael said, ask any questions you have. I think, presentation-wise, it's probably going to be around 45 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time at the end for some questions. But let's dive right in. In case anyone is not aware, ISE 3.0 is currently the recommended release. There's been a lot of end-of-life announcements around the licensing in 2.0 and some of those 2.0 releases. So TAC is going to recommend anybody who's having any sort of issues, or if you ask TAC, 3.0 is going to be the recommended release right now. It's been out for 6-7 months right now. 3.1 is the current release. 3.0 will most likely become the recommended release probably early next year. Usually the way that TAC works with the BU is it has to run in environments for roughly 3 to 6 months where tickets and things like that are kind of watched to make sure everything is fully stable and no major issues. So 3.0 is a major release right now. I'm not going to go through this slide here and kind of talk about these. I will talk about them individually, especially hitting on all the high points, but kind of just for your reference, as you'll see this presentation have slides later. There are a lot of features in 3.0 and including 3.1, right? And we'll talk through these and go through these in separate discussions. But let's dive right into everyone's favorite topic, right? We're going to talk about ISE licensing here. First of all, switch me to the other side here so we can go through this. License updates, right? Because there is definitely some simplification happening from the ISE BU, right? ISE licensing has always been very complicated to kind of figure out and understand what you need and how to scale that. So there's some what I think are very powerful changes going forward. I'm going to talk about some of the supported platforms going for the 3.0 and 3.1 release, as there are some changes. There are some hardware items that are being end of life, so it's not being supported going forward. ISE and AWS, a huge major feature of 3.1. I'll talk about that. We'll dive right into some of the interface changes that are making the product very usable in terms of being able to very quickly dive around and find exactly what you're looking for. As we all know, ISE has a complex menu structure. For those that are into the APIs, right, 3.1 is ISE's API release, right? Heavily focused on APIs, being able to get all the information in and out of your environment to the point that you can actually manage and use your ISE instance install without ever logging into ISE, right? You can, if you have your own interfaces you build or your own tools, you can simply use APIs to get that information in and out of ISE. So it's very powerful. Finally, we're going to talk about the posture enhancements. There were some major updates, especially around Linux, on the posture assessments, and then I'll touch on some of the other highlighted features that are more quick. So with that, let's dive right in here. I'm going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, licensing changes. So one of the first things you're going to notice here is that from going from the 2.x to the 3.0 model, we're going from a Lego type stacking model that we have in 2.x to a nested DOM model, right? So what's going to happen is, in the past, as you guys all know, you had to have a base license for every single device that you authenticated on the network. And then depending on what additional feature you needed, whether it was compliance or posture, or you needed to have profiling, you would need an additional license on top of that. So it created some complexity in terms of, where I'm at right now, where I want to go, what license do I buy now, what license do I buy later. So it created some confusion, and obviously you had to buy multiple licenses for the same device. So there were some challenges around that. So one of the things that was changed in the 3.0 model is with that stacking model, now you basically buy the license for the highest tier for the feature you need, right? So for example, if you wanted to do compliance or posture for 500 your devices, you would only need to buy 500 Premier licenses. You wouldn't need to buy Advantage or Essentials. Plus, every single one of those features that are under Advantage or Essentials would all be included in that license. So it makes it a little easier in terms of kind of understanding what you're going to need and where you're going to grow going forward. Now, the one caveat to that is The 3.x will only require smart licensing. So you need to make sure that your ISE instance is on smart licensing prior to upgrading to 3.0. So that is one of the key changes. So there is an ISE conversion document for the BU put out, right? It does some very good information, and this is kind of the math around how the licensing will work. Because when you'll notice when I show a real world example, or when you upgrade your licensing to 3.x, you're going to notice that your license counts look different than they do in the 2.0 model, right? Because of the fact that you do not need multiple licenses for the same device, the license consolidation happens based on that nested sort of layout. So if I take a real world example here, so if I'm on a 2.7 instance, for example, and this is my licensing, right? I have 300 Apex licenses, I have 700 plus, and of course I have 1200 base to cover all my devices. You can see in that old model, you know, if I had a device that came on and did 802.1x, and then I had to do profiling, and then I had to do compliance or posture, I would use every one of those licenses. Now, when I transition to the new model over there, what you're going to notice there is I only have 500 base licenses in my account now. I'll have 400 in Advantage and the 300 in Premier. So the way that works, if you follow that previous slide with the math, is you start off with the highest tier, right? I have 300 Apex licenses. So those will transfer over. I have 300 Premier, right? I then subtract that 300 from the plus, and I get that 400 for Advantage, because the device will only ever use one license. So if it goes to Premier, I still have those Advantage feature sets without having to use that license, which I did in the past, right? And then finally, you're going to see the base is down to 500 because I'm going to subtract that 400 and 300. So that 7 minus the 1200 gives you the 500. So this is very complex, I mean, initially when you first see it, but it does make sense. Ultimately, you have the same number of licenses, right? I'm still able to onboard 1200 devices on 802.1x as an essentials feature, or I'm able to onboard the 700 for the Advantage or the 300 Premier. It just looks a little different in the Smart account, right? And I've gotten a lot of questions from customers around situations where if I'm looking at that new model, right, say I have 500 devices and I'm doing 802.1x right now, and I make a policy set change, and all of a sudden I'm no longer doing profiling or posture, right? But I have more devices coming on now. Now all those additional 700 that I was pulling a higher license from, will they still be allowed to go onto the network and utilize that essentials license? Because now in theory, I could still pull 1200 essential licenses, right? And the answer to that is yes. You'll notice that in your Smart account, you'll be able to, and this will happen automatically, you'll be able to pull licenses down from higher tiers. So if I end up utilizing, in this case, you'll see here, I'm using 1637 more essentials license than I have in my account. I will go to the next highest level, which is in this case is Advantage, and I'm going to borrow that 1637 from there. So that's how it's going to show within your Smart portal. And then as soon as that one of those devices then starts doing some sort of action based on a profile, then that license will be released from Essentials and pulled from Advantage. So hopefully it's not clear as mud, but there is some changes. Ultimately, I think it's a positive change for Cisco. It's a positive change for the security BU and ISE, where we're making things a lot easier for customers to consume, to understand, and ultimately be successful with not only what they're doing now, but kind of figure out how that growth pattern is going to be. Now, in terms of 3.1, right? So there was one additional license change that we had to make, right? And that had to do around the VMs. As you guys know, in 2.x or even in 3.0, when you purchase a VM, you'd have to purchase a license based on the VM size. So there was a small, medium, and large, and that had to do with the resources that were allocated to that VM, right? That caused a lot of complexity because sometimes you didn't know which VM size you would need, and if you bought a small license and you ended up needing more resources and you went to a medium VM, you'd have to get a new license. Or in the case of maybe you bought small licenses and you downloaded the small VM, but you changed the resources allocations inside of your hypervisor to now look like it's a medium VM to ISE. So then ISE would be like, okay, well now I see this as a medium VM in terms of resources. I need a medium license. So it created some complexity around that. So what the ISE BU is doing is starting with 3.1, there's just a common license. It's just a VMC license. So no matter what size VM you're going to pull, it's going to utilize that same license. So again, simplification, we're having simplification on the feature side and now simplification on the ISE side. This will be required for ISE going 3.1 or above. I also did here, if you're running ISE 3.0 patch 5, which is not out yet, patch 4 just came out, patch 5, it will also require the VMC license. So how that process will work is when you're going to upgrade to 3.1 or even prior, you can have those licenses in your smart account. There's a $0 upgrade SKU that your account team will process for you, and that will make sure that those VMC licenses are in your smart account. So that's all I have on the licensing side. Hopefully you guys agree that, I mean, it's definitely some positive changes going forward on that. So in terms of the 3.0 supported platforms, let me just dive right in real quick to just go over a reminder over the ISE architecture, because some of these personas are specific to certain resource utilizations and what needs to go where. So I want to make sure we kind of understand the ISE architecture. So overview, right? ISE has 4 basic personas or functions within ISE. You have your policy administration node, is your PAN, right? That's your central pane of glass where you do all your configuration changes, and that gets replicated all out. You have your MMT nodes, which is your monitoring and troubleshooting nodes. That's all your logging, your syslog, etc. And then you have your policy service nodes, right? Your PSNs. And these are the ones that are going to respond to your radius requests or your TACACS requests and actually make the policy decisions and apply those policy decisions. And then finally, the PX grid controller that handles all the sharing of the contextual information that we're getting ISE. So these are the 4 major personas within ISE. And then we have multiple options in terms of how we actually deploy that. Is it a standalone situation where all those personas are on one server, or are we distributing that out? And are we then taking and putting a separate server or separate VM for every single one of those personas? And ultimately, that's how we get to the scale. So you can see on the bottom there, in terms of the chart, a single node deployment with the 3500 series hardware appliance or similarly sized VM, or the 3600 hardware appliance or similarly sized VM, you're going to get up to 50,000 concurrent endpoints in a standalone solution, right? But where you really scale is in that distributed ISE situation, right? Where we're starting to pull and peel some of those nodes off, where we can scale up to 2 million, right? So in terms of, let's move this up there, in terms of how we deploy this to get to the scale, you can see like in a lab and evaluation edition of ISE, we allow license levels up to 100, right? So you're able to get the 100 endpoints. And this is used for labs or testing, evaluating certain features, or evaluating ISE in general. Most customers start off either in the small HA, where they have 2 VMs or 2 physical appliances that are running all the personas on them. And that's where you're going to get up to 20,000, up to maybe 50,000, depending on some of the features and things you're running off that small node. Then you can start peeling away the PSN functionality, right? And get really higher up to those 50,000 concurrent devices. And then for our largest customers, you can see here where you have 2 PANs, 2 MMTs, up to 50 PSNs, and up to 4 dedicated PX Grid persona machines. That's how we achieve that 2 million concurrent endpoints on that 3600 series model, right? So again, great information in terms of scale. I do have a link down there that kind of goes over how to scale ISE and all the different features and the different in terms of scale items for every one of those features in that document. So it's a great document to utilize. But kind of why I wanted to go into some of this is in some of these versions in terms of ISE going forward, you can see in 3.1, we are no longer supporting the 3515 hardware appliance. Now, the 3500 series appliances are in the end of life cycle now, but the 3595 will still be supported in 3.1. So if you're migrating from 2.7 and you're going to 3, the 3515 and 3595 are fully supported. But just do note that if you do go to 3.1, we're no longer able to support the 3515 going forward. But you can see at the top there in terms of other supported platforms, right? In terms of the hypervisor, ISE still fully supports, VMware ESXi, KVM, Hyper-V on any server, and in specifically the 3.0 release, we released the ability to put ISE inside of AWS and Azure, but the caveat is it has to be within VMware Cloud, right? But you do notice that will change, right? So in terms of 3.1, the major release for 3.1 was the ability to have ISE inside of AWS as a native EC2 instance, right? So it's huge for a lot of my customers that have been looking at putting ISE out there in AWS. But why I wanted to reference kind of the persona document is the EC2 instance types do matter in terms of how you deploy that within ISE. So within the two EC2 types, you have your C5 and your M5. Your C5 being your more high performance compute power, and the M5 being your more general purpose one. If you're going to run all the personas on a dedicated single instance, you have to have a C5 instance, right? So you'll notice there we have the 4 extra large and the 9 extra large right now in terms of what was released at a GA for 3.1. In terms of your M5, if you're going to pull some of those personas away, especially for the PAN and MNT, right now those could go on the M5 instance. Now, at the current GA, we only have the 4 extra large, right? But post GA, which will most likely be patch level 1, we're going to introduce the 8 extra large and the 16 extra large. So that will really get to the point where we are scaling. And you can see in terms of the scaling numbers here, right? When you start really scaling out, you'll notice that we still have the limitation of 500,000 max sessions on a fully distributed system within AWS. Now, the goal is to have the same sort of scale on-prem as in the public cloud. So with those additional M5s that are going to be coming out, the goal is to get that 16 extra large to match that 2 million. So if you wanted to host your entire ISE deployment inside of AWS or be able to scale both on-prem and in the cloud, that's where those other additional M5s are going to be coming out. And like I said, that should be post-GA, so most likely patch level 1 going forward. So kind of the instance types and limitations and things like that. So in terms of ISE and AWS, I want to show this particular item here just because it's really around where are we going, right? So ISE in the AWS marketplace was released in 3.1. The next release will be Azure Marketplace, which is scheduled for Q4 calendar year 21. So it should be anywhere between now and Christmas time, right? OCI will be the next release after that, followed by GCP. So it's kind of the feedback that we got from customers as to what's important to them in terms of a public cloud environment to run ISE in. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Like I said, Azure is going to be next. That's probably it's definitely the most popular one besides AWS, followed by OCI and GCP going forward. And I kind of did want to show this option as well, because it is sometimes confusing as to how does one consume a license or how does one consume a Cisco product in the public cloud with licensing and things like that. So this is a very good chart to kind of explain how the process works. So what you would do as a customer if you were looking at putting ISE inside of AWS, you would buy your licenses and your VM licenses directly from Cisco like you do now. Those will all go into your smart account. You will then work with whatever marketplace it's going to be, whether it's AWS or when it comes out with Azure. You will spin up those particular instances as you need in your environment. And then once those instances are up, they'll pull from your smart account and they'll apply the licenses that you had purchased going in step 1. And then finally, you'd be responsible for the resource charges to the public cloud provider, right? So again, it's a very simplified process. The key there is just make sure the licenses are in place, and other than that, it's following everything through the AWS marketplace. So in terms of interface changes, right? There's not a whole lot in terms of what has changed. And initially, when I had first heard about the interface changes, I was wondering how impactful they would be, but honestly, it's probably been one of the most impactful changes to the interface that I've had with ISE since I've been using it, which has been since the 1.4 ages. So when you first log into ISE, you'll notice that not much has changed, right? I still have the same type of interface I had prior in 2.7. But when you hit that ICE menu, that's where it really starts to change, right? So now I kind of get this interactive search, right? So since I'm in the Work Center panel there, I get all the different sections. I can really quickly see where I want to go versus kind of pivoting through the menu system. But the power here is really in that search bar, right? So as I'm typing, that search is actually building out for me. So if I know it's a settings I'm looking for, I just can't remember what exactly it is, I can start typing settings and I can instantly see, oh, hey, I'm looking for the API gateway settings. Right there it is. I can click it and it takes me right to that page. So I've noticed that it has sped up the amount of time it takes for me to find things and move and pivot within ICE. So now I'm very quickly going from menu to menu without having to kind of click through some sub-menus to find the actual menu I need to go. So definitely very impactful. There's also a Make-A-Wish button, which is right there, right? So the BU does take that very seriously. So if you're utilizing the product and you see something that, maybe it would be more impactful if it was located here or renamed to this, or I wish the menu system worked like this, or this would be a cool feature to have, definitely make that wish. They do utilize that. They do review that. And that does get added to roadmap for situations where it makes sense or a number of customers are asking for it. So very important to have on there. And then one of the really cool features that I use all the time now is the recent pages, right? Because obviously, if you look in the past, if I'm making a policy change and then I'm going into policy sets, making that change, and then I need to go into the authorization policies, profiles, and make changes there, and I have to go add a result set. Every single one of those are going to require multiple clicks to get to, right? But once I click in that, I can just click on those recent pages and it will take me right to that page. So I can go to profiling policies, make a change, hit that policy set, jump right back to where I was before, and etc. So again, very quickly navigating through the system. One of the other cool features that was released in the 3.0 release, and this will continue to evolve, is the help menu, right? So you'll notice that when I go in here, a lot of the links, if you've ever been on an ICE presentation, my presentation will have these as well. A lot of those links, including the ICE YouTube link, the ICE BU does a fantastic job of doing YouTube videos on all features, how to configure them, what's new, things like that. So if you ever need any training for ICE, definitely check out their YouTube channel. But now you can kind of see the information over there in terms of what's over there, also current software patch levels, and that performance document and scale document there as well. Now going forward, this is going to evolve even farther. So in ICE 3.1 patch 1, you will also be able to open up TAC tickets directly from this help menu, right? So again, allowing you to kind of, modernize your workflow, make it a little easier, make it not so difficult to navigate within Cisco itself. So a lot of good information in there as well.
Hey, Jason, we did have a quick question.
Sure.
Somebody was asking around from an upgrade perspective and the timing of things. The question was, do they need to make sure, do customers need to make sure that they upgrade their licensing first before they go through an upgrade?
Yeah, great question. So the process is twofold. So you do want to make sure that the VMC licenses are in the smart account, because that can happen completely out of band of what you're doing, right? So you can go in there and talk with your account team, and we can get those licenses imported into you. But do note, you won't have any problems if you do upgrade, because with like any other ICE, once I upgrade, I have a 45-day window to rectify my licensing. So this is very important for those features license, right? Because when you upgrade from 2.7, say, to 3.0, once you do that upgrade, your licensing is going to become out of compliance, because ICE 3.0 doesn't understand the Apex Plus and base licenses. It's expecting Premier, Advantage, or Essentials. So the process will be, once you upgrade to 3.0, is at that point you have to open up a ticket with licensing, because unfortunately the account teams don't have the ability to fix that licensing. And what happens is they will go into your smart account. They will make sure to see what you currently have when that term expires, and then they're going to create all the new licensing structure to match those terms, right? So then they'll have all those licenses in there to go. And then once that happens, you'll notice that when your ICE, checks back into the smart license portal, your licensing will be in compliance again. When you go to 3.1, that's when you're required to have that VMC license, which is, like I said before, the account team will need to put a $0 order through. So if you have 5 VMs, you would need 5 upgrade licenses. and those can be processed at pretty much any time, and they will go into your smart account. So when 3.1 is looking for that VMC license, it'll pull that. So I have a document that I have a little farther along at the slide presentation where I talk a little bit about the upgrade process, but all that is in there. You guys will have this information to review. I can also share out the slides as well. But yeah, so that's a good question. It is a multi-step process. Most customers I'm working with are simply just going to the 3.0 release because it is the recommended release. The only customers I have going to 3.1 are customers that are requiring the AWS instance, because that's where it's first supported. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, let me know and I can dig a little deeper into it. Any other questions, Michael?
No, I think that's it so far. And you
Perfect.
said thank you. So thank you for answering that question, Jason.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no worries. So hopefully you guys had a chance to look at some of the ISE APIs, right? They're very powerful. I've done some pretty cool things with the APIs myself. I used to travel a lot before the whole COVID thing. And when my kids were because for some reason my kids would always misbehave while I was gone. It made it very difficult for my wife to kind of limit what the kids could do on their phones or their computers. So I actually built an interface for her to basically be able to quarantine all the kids' devices based on how they were behaving. So if they weren't doing their chores or they weren't doing their homework or they were just misbehaving, my wife could go in there, click a button, say quarantine all of Ryan's devices, and basically kick all his devices off the network. And then when he was behaving, she'd go in there and undo that, right? So it really shows the power of what you can do with the ISE APIs. And now that everything is included in the ISE APIs, you can do your policy, import policies and export your policies and move them somewhere else. So a lot of cool things. So let's dive into kind of the API updates. So one of the cool things that the ISBU did with 3.1 is we moved to partner and start doing everything with the Open API initiative. So the goal there was to kind of standardize on an API structure and documentation, right? So you can see the specification over time, and I'm going to build this slide out here. ISE 1.0 came out, in 2011, very similar to where Swagger 1.0 came out in terms of how to properly document the APIs. As Swagger grew, Cisco, we then came out with a 1.2 release where we started adding the ERS APIs. Swagger, which was the Open API specification before being renamed, then moved to 3.0 and then finally 3.1. And at that point, ISE felt that the Open API standard was mature, it made sense. So one of the things that we did as part of the 3.1 release was we also moved to that standard. So you'll see some of the benefits of that going forward, but it definitely makes it easier for your DevOps-minded people to have a consistent sort of documentation process throughout. So in terms of some of the additional Open APIs that we've added in 3.1, the ability to do your backup and restores via API, your certificate managed via API. The policy API has by far been the most requested API since I started working with ISE, right? There was always challenges on getting policies that you've created out of ISE and imported into a new ISE install, right? It was something that TAC had to do via the CLI, and it was kind of a pain. So that is a huge increase in terms of productivity there. The repository API for your upgrades, services, task services, and TrustSec, right? And then with patch level 1, we're going to add 3 more in there. So again, really ramping up on the API side as we recognize that customers have mature DevOps environments. We have customers that do not want to use the ISE interface if at all possible because they have their homegrown solutions that they utilize on a day-to-day basis, but they want to be able to interact with ISE and be able to use those features and functions, right? So it makes really good sense in terms of our long-term our strategy going forward. So we talked a little about this. So we have our open APIs, the ones I mentioned before. We still have our ERS type APIs in terms of responding, our monitoring MMT for our monitoring and management, or monitoring and troubleshooting and logging, and then our PX grid for sharing of information, right? So those all APIs are all there. And you can kind of see the new standard. You can do this on your local Icebox. You can go to DevNet and kind of see this, but I can kind of see this is kind of what that open API strategy is. I can kind of see all the APIs that are available. I can dig into one and see which parameters do I post, which responses do I get back. I can even hit the try it out button there if I want to be able to actually try out what this API looks like in my environment, what information it grabs back. So a lot of good information, especially if you're new to APIs, on how to dive in there, what APIs are available, what can I do. A lot of good information available there to you, and you can see the information you're getting back and how relevant is that what I'm looking for, things like that. In terms of the API itself, right, one of the challenges with the API in the past was that the different API schemes use different ports. So if I wanted to, quarantine somebody using ERS, I had to know that that runs on 9060. Or if I needed to do any sort of UI once it was over SSL, or PX was on 8910. With the 3.1 release, we introduced the API gateway. So now it's a common port that I'm connected to, that common API. And then from there, it goes to the appropriate function. So whether it be ERS, MNT, PX, or just UI. So again, trying to simplify and make it easier for our developers out there for interacting with ISE. And that API gateway service can run on any sort of node. And then in terms of DevNet, if you're not familiar with DevNet, definitely do check it out. All that information in terms of what APIs are available by release, a lot of good information in there, all available within the DevNet. There's also sandboxes in there too. If you want to play with a ISE sandbox and not play around with your environment, you can go in there and play around with creating APIs and seeing what information you can get in and out of ISE. If you guys are active in terms of the APIs, I highly recommend one of the TMEs in ISE, Thomas Howard, created a Postman dump in terms of taking all those APIs and putting them in a Postman. I'm a heavy user of Postman myself in terms of testing APIs. Basically, you download this, you import this, and then you just need to change your authentication to match what you're utilizing in your environment, and also just change the IP address or host name of your ISE instance, and you'll be able to start utilizing all the ISE APIs in your environment. So very powerful tool if you guys are Postman. I highly recommend that. So any questions, Michael, before I dive into kind of the posture? So make sure.
No, you're good to go.
Okay, perfect. So posture enhancements, like I said, there's been a lot of good posture enhancements with 3.1, specifically around Linux, right? Linux has been kind of the one ask for all of our customers when it came to posture support, right? Because we didn't have any Linux support. Linux is prevalent in the enterprise now. So you can see here, these are all the supported Linux distros that we're utilizing for posture or compliance, right? So Red Hat, various Red Hat instances, SUSE, and Ubuntu, right? Those are the major ones that, through various feedback mechanisms from the BU, came customer information back, what versions they were utilizing. Now, the one caveat right now is that we do require the full AnyConnect agent for Linux, right? So there's no temporal agent available just yet. It will come down the road. But our goal was just to get the posture enhancements into Linux. So first, I want to just give a quick kind of synopsis on what posture means through Cisco, right? So we have two options. We have whether it's a posture check or a posture remediation, right? So the posture check would be something like, do I have my firewall enabled? I'm going to check against that particular piece. Whereas the remediation is, hey, I noticed that I don't have the firewall enabled. Can you start that firewall for me? Or I noticed that, your Firefox isn't up to date, or you're not running the latest version of your antivirus signatures, right? That's where I can go out and update those. And that's part of the remediation option there. The three operating systems that we do support for ISE posture, Windows, Mac OS, and Linux now. Now, there are various agent types. Linux only supports the AnyConnect posture module as of right now, but on Windows and Mac OS, we do support the temporal and also the new agentless, and various features depending on your agent type and what you're trying to do. But in terms of process checks, or posture checks, I say, this is what is currently supported on the various operating systems. So you'll notice that Windows and Mac OS, there's a lot of posture checks options available. On the Linux side, the first go around was kind of get those major features and functionalities in there. So being able to check for anti-malware. And we do support a number of anti-malware vendors out there, 30 plus right now. The existence of a file, right? Does that file exist in there? I know when I was on the customer side, we did various things with files. If a file exists in a certain directory, we knew it was a corporate asset if we didn't have it, in our MDM. So we can do things like that, look for certain files whether it's the right checksum, whether it's the right, data existence, etc. We can do that as part of our posture check. As well as patch management. Now that's always going to depend on the flavor of Linux you're running, but we have that as part of a posture check. And of course, we can check to make sure certain processes are running as well. Now, in terms of remediation options, right now Linux only supports the script-based remediation option, and we'll go into that. There will be other options that are supported going forward. The script being the most flexible right now because you can just manually script whatever you want it to do. So if it doesn't have that particular application running, you can just script to start it. Or if I don't have a particular file there, I can just script it to install that file, download that file, update that file, whatever. So the script is a very powerful tool. So the BU felt like that was a priority over everything else. Obviously, the applications get a little tricky because with Windows and Mac OS, there's a common application, but with Linux, there's a lot of applications depend on the distro you're running. So there'll be some challenges on that portion of it. But again, the script is very powerful in terms of how that works. And in terms of custom remediation scripts, on a Windows, it's going to be a PowerShell script. On both OS X and Linux, it's going to be a shell script. So again, those do require the AnyConnect agent to be running. And kind of how that process works, when that particular client connects over wired, wireless, VPN, whatever, to ISE, you're going to establish that connection, and then the AnyConnect client and ISE will exchange certificates, make sure they say who they say they are, build that trust, and at that point, the script is triggered to run on the AnyConnect agent. So very, very good and clean process, very easy to use, and very powerful in terms of what you can do for it. Now, one of the features that we've been asking for a long time has been agentless posture, right? And this is only going to be available on the Windows and OS X side initially. But what this allows us to do is, if we didn't want to use the temporal agent, which is basically pushing the agent over the web interface to the agent to do the posturing, is we're doing it over a SSH or connection, right? Or so you'll see here, right? I have a device, it comes onto the network, right? My policy for this particular device is I have agentless posture enabled, right? So when that box connects, I needed a way to figure out how exactly that box meets in terms of posture. So what will happen is ISE will actually push over via PowerShell or SSH connection and run that script locally. And then based on those results, will then determine whether or not it matches where my authorization essentially, goes and where I'm allowed to go onto the network, right? Again, so it's an additional option other than the temporal agent, which will run inside the browser. Because we did have customers that didn't want to push it over a browser because maybe it isn't a browser-based function. Maybe they're not using a browser, or they want to deal with the browser, this way they can do it over PowerShell over SSH, right? So there are some caveats in terms of what users or groups need to be and things like that. So definitely do check out the release and configuration notes. But again, a very powerful agentless posture going forward. So in terms of some additional features, I did want to highlight on some of these. Let me just, this one's a busy slide, so I'm just going to put myself up there. So in terms of random MAC address issues, right, you'll notice, and I'm going to build this slide out, the various operating systems, whether it be Windows, Android, or iOS, privacy is a huge concern with these vendors. They want to make sure that their customers are private, and so does pretty much everybody, right? But obviously, there's a trade-off between privacy and security. The more that we hide, the less that we can look at to verify whether or not that's a secure device. So with the recent releases of the various operating systems, randomization of MACs has become very important. So what you start noticing as devices start coming onto your network with randomized MACs that had been on your network prior, that looked like a new device, right? Because if I'm on my iPhone and I connect to my SSID and I have private address enabled, it's going to show as that new private address, which isn't going to match any device it's seen before. And this creates a lot of challenges. And even Android 11.12, you have the ability to constantly have a non-persistent MAC, right? So if I'm on an iOS device and I connect to the same SSID, I'm going to always have that same private address. If I connect to a different SSID, or I connect to over 5G, LTE, whatever, I'm going to have a different private address, different MAC address. But it will always be the same once I'm on that. where in Android, I can randomize even that. So again, the challenge is really hard is how do I make sure that devices that are integrated into my MDM or devices that I've seen in my network are recognized as devices that I've seen before, right? And this has been a challenge and something that a lot of administrators have had to deal with, right? So with the 3.0 release, we introduce some Cisco's way of kind of handling that. So you can kind of see the challenge here. So if I have a dual SSID, so I'm on my Windows laptop, I connect to an open wireless LAN, right? That's my MAC address that I'm going to present to ISE. ISE creates that certificate, sends it over to my laptop. Okay, you're on the network. I know who you are, right? Then I move and I come over to a different wireless network, right? And what you're going to notice there is that my MAC address is different now because I'm on a different median, right? So now when it goes to ISE, ISE isn't going to recognize that anymore because it's going to say, I don't know who this MAC address and device is, right? So that creates a challenge because now it's going to, if my policy states, if I'm registered in my MDM or if ISE knows of this user based on its MAC address, it has no idea and it's going to think it's a new device. So it creates a challenge. The same thing with your MDM or EMM system, right? I'm on my same Windows laptop, I'm coming over cellular, I'm registering with my MDM, right? So that certificate gets pushed over, it recognizes that particular MAC address. But now when I connect over corporate wireless, I'm no longer compliant because my policy may state if my MDM status is compliant, connect to my network. Well, it doesn't think that I'm compliant because it doesn't know who AE is. It's looking for that MAC address 3.0 in the previous section, right? So it's causing a lot of failures and it created a lot of situations where people had to go back and turn off all those random MAC features and create quite a challenge, right? So how we're going to handle this in this enhancement for 3.1 is we're going to assign a global unique ID that's going to be put into the certificate. So it doesn't matter at that point whether or not that device is utilizing the MAC address it created for the cellular versus the MAC address it created for the wireless, right? Because in my policy on ISE, I'm going to have it look inside of that certificate for that URI, which will contain the global unique ID. And that certificate will get pushed down to the client with that global unique ID. So therefore, even though I'm changing MAC addresses or changing medians and how I'm coming into the network, it knows if that device was truly onto the network. So again, it creates a lot of just take myself off there. So you see a lot of different ways to get around the challenges that we had within ISE and random MAC address filtering. You can see here, same thing if I'm doing it just to regular BYOD devices with ISE, right? I'm going to get the certificate. It's going to put the MAC address GUI in there, and it's going to make sure that I look at that as my source of truth versus just looking at that MAC address in the past, right? Because obviously this isn't something that's going to go away in terms of the randomized MAC address, and I'm imagining most, if not all vendors will eventually do non-persistent MAC address randomization on every median just to kind of, keep security top of mind and privacy. So in terms of some of the other options, we touched a little bit on the upgrade path going forward, but one of the things that were released with the 3.0 release is the ability, or I shouldn't say with the 3.0 release, in the older versions that are now coming to light, is the ability to do different upgrade types. So we have the split upgrade and the full upgrade. So the split upgrade, if you know, is how we traditionally upgrade ISE, where you do different nodes at a time, depending on the nodes, and do those upgrades, right? The full upgrade basically allows us to do the primary PSN once, or primary PAN once, and then do everything else at the same time. So dramatically reducing the amount of time to do the full upgrade. And you can see here the different versions that require that going forward. So in terms of how to get to ISE 3.0, I have a link that's on the slide coming up. But to get to 3.0, you have to be in the last three versions, right? So 2.4, 2.6, 2.7. That will be your upgrade path to 3.0. If you want to go directly to 3.1, you'd have to go either be on version 2.6, 2.7, or 3.0. That's kind of how ISE standard is. They will support upgrades from the previous three versions. Now, in terms of if you want to do the full upgrade process, that's the different individual patch levels you have to be at for that to be supported. And really what the split upgrade process is versus the full upgrade, this is how we traditionally did ISE upgrades. I'm just going to build this out, right? You would do you would deregister your secondary PAN, upgrade that, promote it to your primary PAN, then do the same thing. Your primary MNT, your PSNs, your secondary MNT, and finally finishing off with your primary PAN. Right. So again, a convoluted process. It got us where we needed to get to. It just took a long time sometimes. And so one of the complaints from customers was, how can we streamline that? So how it works with the full upgrade process is basically it's 2 steps, right? I do my primary PAN, I get that to the upgraded version, and then it will bulk upload everything else at the exact same time. So now I'm taking 5 steps that may take 45 minutes each, and I'm doing it over 2 steps. So I'm dramatically reducing the amount of time it takes to do the upgrade for ICE. So I think a very powerful feature going forward. This is the upgrade documentation. Like I said, here is the link. You can just go into Google and search ICE Journey Map 3.0. It is an interactive document, so I can click on the various parts of the ICE journey and jump to the appropriate information. So we'll tell you, what options in terms of where you need to go from the upgrade path, or how can I check and verify certain things are in place for the upgrade, and what I need to do before and after the upgrade. It will go all into the licensing as well, and also some post-upgrade options. So a very good document. The BU spent a lot of time upgrading this or posting this and working on it. So very good information. I definitely push all my customers to that as well. And then finally, just the last feature that came with 3.1 that I wanted to throw out there was this enhanced audit log. So it's been something I've been asking for the BU for a long time. Coming from a compliance background and dealing with a lot of assessors and auditors, one of the things that we're lacking in ICE's audit log was it would tell you that something changed, but it wouldn't necessarily tell you what changed, right? So again, that was always an issue with compliance, an issue with auditors or assessors coming in environments where they had to see, well, what changed, and you knew who changed, who changed it, when it was changed, and you kind of understood what was changed, but not exactly. So you can see pre-post 3.1, all I get was change configuration. Where in the new information, I can see that what was changed was my authorization results was changed from a deny access to a limited access, right? So you get a lot more information. So I know this will make a lot of people happy in terms of being able to provide the appropriate audit logs in your environment. And then in terms of ICE 3.1, just build this out right here. ICE 3.1 will solely just support PXGrid 2.0. Now, PXGrid 2.0 has been out for a long time. There were some limitations in 1.0 in terms of scale. PXGrid has gotten very popular with both Cisco products and non-Cisco products in terms of being able to share all that contextual information with all of our customers and all the different products, right? So we needed a way to scale that. So with 2.0, we made it more robust and more scalable and be able to share more information to more devices. So on the right-hand side there is the PXGrid 2.0 supported minimum versions for our Cisco security products. So some of these products have been out for a long time. Firepower 6.0 has been out for a long time. But I know StealthWatch Enterprise version 7.3.2 is a newer version. So I wanted to put that in there. And then right there below the 2.x, that bit.ly, that's going to be all the third-party software integrations that we have, what version of software they require for that contains PXGrid 2.0 supportability. So again, I just wanted to throw it out there. That was a change. I know you started seeing some of those error messages within ICE sometimes. If you're running 2.7, that the 2.0 release would, or 1.0 would eventually go away. So if you had any 1.0 integrations, you needed to move them over to 2.0. And then my last slide here is just, again, a lot of these are on the menu help system in ICE 3.0, but in there for your information as well. So you'll be able to see the slides and follow these links. Great information out there. The community pages are maintained and monitored by the ICE BU and Cisco employees. So if you have questions about things, definitely put your posts up there. They are very active in those, so you'll be able to get the answers to questions. And then if you want to see some of features and functionalities and how to configure things, definitely check out the YouTube channels as well. And then the link down there for the future webinars. The ICE BU does a lot of good webinars out there, so definitely check those out. So with that, I'm all set. I don't know, Michael, if there's any questions that popped up along the way.
Yeah, there was one question that came up. You went through the upgrade paths, moving from 2x to 3x. Are there any mechanisms to, if a customer had a 2.x ICE cluster deployed and they were building a net new 3.x cluster, is there an easy way or a simplified way to take the policies that are built out in their 2.x cluster and simply export them, if you will, and import them into a 3.x cluster? Or what are the best practices for that type of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, what I would recommend in that situation is definitely work with TAC. You can pull those policies out from the APIs and then import them back into your new ICE cluster via the APIs. So that is a huge win, something we could not do in the past, which was a limitation. But in terms of making sure everything's done correctly, if you have never done that before, I would recommend, making sure you open up a TAC case. They can do the verification to make sure you're getting all using the right API calls to get all the information out, including the policies, making sure, your authorization policies, your authentication policies, and all those other things that those policy sets will call will be copied over as well. But yeah, I mean, I do recommend that if you can sometimes set up a new instance for your ICE cluster, definitely a good option.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And we do have about 5 minutes left. So if there are any questions too, feel free, if you want to come off mute and ask questions, we can do that now.
It is Friday, and it is ICE.
Yeah. Oh no, it's all
That's
good.
the most exciting topic.
And honestly, if you think of questions that come up after we're done this call, obviously, feel free to reach out to your account teams. Reach out to Dave, Jason. Great resources to have. Thank you again, Jason, for the presentation. It was fantastic. And as always, we're going to post the recording as well, so you'll get a link to this call. But thanks again for everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you guys next month. Thanks, guys.
Have a great weekend, guys.
Thank you. See you guys.